This is the Commercial Landscapers Podcast, hosted by Dave Anderson and Robert Klinkenbeard. This show will absolutely transform your leadership by developing all aspects of your life in business, family, personal and health. Only by fine-tuning yourself will you truly operate as a highly functioning leader. Dennis McIntee, welcome to the Landscapers Podcast. Really appreciate you being here today. Super excited that we've known each other now for at least a couple of years now, and really excited that you could join me today. So thank you, Dennis.
You know what? It's awesome, Robert. And I kind of think there's nothing you wouldn't do for me, and there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you. And the last couple of years, you and I have been going around doing nothing for each other, and it's worked out well, right?
That's so true.
It's a great relationship.
Thanks for the call out, Dennis.
Right. No, it's good. It's good.
So Dennis, he is a wonderful person. He's a gifted keynote speaker, an author, travels across the US speaking at leadership summits, does a lot of management training events, healthcare conferences, and an all-round super nice guy. He's also, I think you've now, how many books you now written, Dennis?
I've written 4 myself. Okay. So
any
more to come.
Okay, cool. Any coming out this year?
We are going to release one called Drama-Free Teams for Nursing. Maybe we'll do Drama-Free Teams for Landscapers. What do you think?
Perfect. Yeah. Well, yeah. Happy to help with that one.
Yeah, they absolutely need it, right?
I don't know what you mean by that. So, Dennis, you've obviously over the last we're now sitting at the beginning of July. The last 3 months have been pretty brutal on both of our businesses. As I mentioned a minute ago. You go around the country, you talk to people, you inspire people. And yeah, generally, how are you feeling right now?
Well, a little bit, Robert, you got to ask me which day, right? Because some days I'm really excited and some days I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I think if we're all honest, it's like, we're going to say the same thing, right? Because things change so much. I think the way that has helped me kind of walk through this is I've realized that, this is not happening to me. It's really happening for me, right? This crisis, yes, it's bad and it's horrible and I wish it wouldn't have happened, but I step back and I go, okay, it's happening for me. And I ask myself, okay, who's the kind of person and what does my business want to look like on the other side of this? Because we're going to come back to a new normal. And so just using this time to be creative and ask yourself some better questions so that you just keep moving forward.
So talking about that, what type of questions are you using, or what type of maybe there was that tools or maybe that mindset just used to dig deep and either pivot or get through this on the other side?
Yeah, so I think first of all, let's ask ourselves what the worst question we can ask ourselves. And I'll never ask that. And the typical question is like, oh my gosh, why does this always happen? Or why is this happening to me? Or why is it like this? And Robert, there's no answer to those questions, right? They send you down a spiral hole of just drama and, not taking responsibility. And I kind of changed the equation and I asked myself, I call it the drama-free question matrix. It's a what or how plus an action verb. So like, what could I do? How can I make this better? What could I achieve? How can I improve this situation? And asking myself a question that starts with what or how really keeps me more proactive. And I think my favorite one is I always ask myself, okay, what does this make possible? I'm sure it's like you, Robert. It's like in the span of like 4 days, I had over 25 events canceled. I had my entire spring and summer canceled, and it happened in 4 days. So,
and how did you feel about that?
Well, those first 4 days, I was depressed, right? I wish I could say, oh my gosh, not a problem. No, first couple of days, I was like depressed. But when I was able to kind of get my wits back and I just asked myself, okay, what does this make possible? I realized that, our whole virtual part of our company and the product side has gone through the roof because I never had time to really create. I never had time to work on it. I was always busy speaking, traveling, working with clients. And so just asking myself, okay, what does this make possible? It opened up this whole new arena that I could start to see creatively.
Well, I mean, you've obviously got some great clients out there. You're talking to a lot of CEOs and
I mean, I'm sure you're probably getting bombarded with, here you are, you're trying to reinvent your business, but you're also getting your clients calling you, and they're also trying to deal with, how do I motivate my team? How do I, keep that culture going? You've gone into a lot of companies and helped to improve that culture. So it's a huge juggling act you have to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key is what's interesting is that word creative and reactive are the same letters. They're just spelled differently. They're just moved different ways. And you can either be reactive or you can be creative. And so a lot of the best CEOs, as we've kind of walked through some of these questions, Robert, for one example, I have one landscape client in the north, and I asked him, I said, hey, how many of your team members, he's got a smaller company, about 70 employees, and I said, hey, how many of your team members have to be on site? And he says, well, just my production guys, my production manager. He says, my entire, staff that answers the phone and works on the administrative. And I said, well, they could be remote full time. Well, think about the money that you could save, or all of a sudden there's other talent pools in other parts of the country. And all of a sudden we started to get really creative about what the business could look like. And so I think that's the key, especially for service industries, is to ask ourselves, okay, what does this make possible? And how do we recreate ourselves on the back end? And just keeping that mindset, I think, is super helpful.
Yeah. And that ties in nicely with my next question. I mean, how do you, it's obviously really difficult to predict the future, but I mean, what do you see out there in terms of the trends, how people are going to change? I mean, I've talked to a few owners, and they were 100% against working virtually, and now they're thinking, well, here I am, my team is working just as efficiently. There is less drama because they're not around other people, and now I can save all this money on rent. So, what do you see out there? What conversations are you having?
Yeah, I think the key right now, Robert, is we're always asking ourselves. It's like, as we walk through this, it's like, what's going to stay and what's going to go away, right? I think there are things that are going to stay, right? So if you're in the landscape business, I mean, you're still going to need guys on site actually doing the work, right? There's certain things that are going to stay, but I think there are other things that are going to go away. And so to sort of ask yourself what stays and then what goes away. And then what we've seen with a lot of clients is that they've had things like on the back burner, things that I want to get to this, I want to get to this. And so we're asking them, it's like, hey, what do you have in the back burner that you can take to the front burner? What do you have? Because right now you have some time maybe to like go recreate certain things. So I think asking yourself, okay, what stays and what goes away? And just being willing to let it go away. There are certain, the blessing for me a little bit is that there have been a couple of clients that have gone away. And at first I mourned it, but I was like, wow, I'm really glad it went away. Right? Because it just opened myself up to a whole new level of possibility and opportunity. But, not mourning the loss. And I think one thing that we have to be very careful of as we go through this is not mourning what we thought it was going to be. Because you think about it, right? The future is all make-believe. Mm-hmm. So in March, I had this idea of what the spring would be like, right? It was like I was going to do all these events, all this product, have all these opportunities. But honestly, Robert, was it a reality? It wasn't. It was just a thought in my mind.
Right.
And I think just like coming to grips with like, hey, just stop mourning what you thought could have been. Because honestly, it's all make-believe. And I think as business owners, I think we have to be careful whether you're having a great season or maybe a tough season. And what's interesting is that we've got clients in the landscape industry that are having great seasons. We have other guys that are having tough seasons. And in that, to kind of like not mourn what you thought it could be and just realize this is your new reality and what can you do now?
Yeah, and I've seen that as well, whether it be in the landscape industry or other industries where, there's a lot of complaining about, oh, my revenue could have been this, or my projected revenue was that. And, I think I maybe not tell them directly this, but, my message is to get over that.
Yeah.
We're you're in a different situation now. There's no getting past that. So how can you make the best of use of it? You've got 6-7 months through the end of the year. So how can you make best use of that? Do you pivot to a different business? Do you maximize what you've got? Do you train your team? So
well, one thing that really helped my team, Robert, is that in March, when this whole thing kind of went down for us, is I just got them all together and I took our strategic plan for the year, and in front of them, I just ripped it up into shreds. I said, hey, you know, all that work we did in January, what we thought this year was going to be like, here, it's in the trash. I said, we have this to work with. We have a virus, we have a shutdown. This is all we have to work with. So how can we make it possible? And like my favorite scene, you remember that scene from like Apollo 13?
Mm-hmm.
When they were up in space and everything was shutting down, and like the one boss got all of the engineers together and he said, we got to make this piece right here fit into this round piece, fit into this square hole, and all we have to work with is, and he just dumped all these parts on the table. And he said, this is all we have to work with. And I kind of did that with my team. I said, hey, we've got these goals, but we don't have all this other stuff. I just have this little piece to work with. Now we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so we just worked really hard not to mourn what we thought could be. And I think as business owners, we've got to help our teams get past what we thought it could be so that we can be creative.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So true. So one of the things, you know, you're big on teams and culture. And again, you probably had this question 1,000 times, but you know, here you have a company who's got like 50, 100, 1,000 employees, and they've been doing Zoom calls for the last 3 months. You know, they've been used to maybe doing some in-person events, barbecues, whatever, team building events at their business, but now they're trying to manage the team and build this culture remotely. So what type of, you know, either tips or ideas do you help either, you know, maybe the CEO, maybe the HR manager on some of the things that they should be doing just to try and either maintain or even enhance that culture?
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that, you know, during this time, as we're being zoomed out, right? I feel like I'm zoomed out. And we're on Zoom right now, right? We're living on Zoom here. Okay, so, but I think the thing to remember is that, you know, it's easy to communicate content, but it's very hard to communicate context. And so what gets lost as we're going through this new wild, wild west, this new world, is to really work on communicating context, which means the why is super important. Why do we do what we do, and why isn't important, and what's the best result, what's the worst result, what are some of the success criteria, and giving some of that backstory is super, super vital. Because if I know your backstory, I can make the right decisions. But if you're just like giving me directions and, you know, just telling me how to think, I'm just going to become this robot. So really working on communicating context to your team is super vital. And almost getting to the point where a lot of things just have to be written out, right? It's like moving from oral history to written history.
Right.
And I think, you know, the context versus content, oral history to written history, some of those things I would just keep in mind really strong as you walk through this time. And then also, you know, what's interesting, Robert, like we've seen a lot of our clients even do fun things like in the evenings. You know, they'll do virtual happy hours with their team, or they'll do bingo night, or just crazy games. They'll do like Scrabble night, where they'll be like, you know, 10 people on a team just getting together doing Scrabble.
Right.
And you know, it's just like, it's got to be fun. Or we have another client that they just open up a Zoom call from 12 to 1, and everybody just sits and, you know, has lunch together, and they have those lunchtime conversations that they would normally have, you know, if I was sitting across from you. They just sort of have these open times. You know, and I know for us, one thing that we did with our team is we just had certain times during the day where we were all on a Zoom call, but Robert, we might not even talk to each other. You know, I'm working on editing a book, and I have another team member that's working on marketing copy, and I have another girl that's doing, you know, some of our accounting, but we're all on a Zoom call, and I can say, hey, anybody hear this? And it just gives that feeling of camaraderie a little bit, even though we're all virtual.
So you might even have some dead times on that call, but you could just jump in. You can either ask a question, you can make a joke. So I suppose it's almost like you mentioned, almost like a potluck. You know, people are bringing along either their lunch or ideas and just hanging out on the Zoom call. I like it.
Yeah, so I think there's ways, you know, one client calls them productivity pods, where they have, 2 times a week where they'll all just get on and, and a lot of clients have even used it for even like planning, even like idea exchange. And so I think there's some things that you could do to be creative with that and go to your team and ask your team, right? Because your team will tell you. Because sometimes, we think as business owners, we have to have all the answers. I'd go back to your team and go, hey, what would make this, more of a unit? Even though we have to all be at different places, how could we kind of like rally together? And the cool thing that I've seen, I don't know with your team, Robert, but with mine, is that the blessing of this is that we've really gelled together. The fact that we were able to tell our team, hey, we're going to make it through this. Nobody is going to lose their job. We're just going to figure this out together. And it really gelled everybody together. Everybody has been more bought in. They've given more of themselves during this time. So I think there's a blessing to a crisis.
No, I agree. And I've done something similar where I've actually tried to build up that trust by just creating an environment on a Zoom call where people are sharing personal stuff. It could be a personal win, could be a personal challenge they're going through. And if people quickly hear some of the challenges they're facing, even if they're trying to work from home and they've got kids running around screaming, I think if people can relate to that and people let their guard down, then it builds that trust up.
Yeah, and I would just encourage business owners, the quickest path to trust is transparency, right? Because people trust things they can see when things are transparent. And when there's things that are hidden or, because it's like everybody makes up their own story. Okay, everybody's making up a story regardless. So you might as well just like take charge of the story,
right? And
just tell people, hey, this is why we're doing it. And this is my thinking and this is my thought process. Because if you leave people in the dark, they will find a story.
Oh yeah, they'll make up that story.
They make it up, right?
A lot of the time it's negative.
Yeah, just take charge of the story. If you want to create a great culture, you as the owner, you take charge of the story.
Yeah, that's great. Good advice. We've talked about some of the challenges with working remotely. What are some of the benefits that you're seeing out there with working remotely?
Oh gosh, I'm sure a lot of people have seen this. I think the big thing that surprised a lot of people is people said, wow, my team can really be productive, right? Because sort of the big fear, because there had been some ideas about remote working with some of my clients like the past 3 or 4 years, and people were always like, well, they're not going to do their work. They're not going to be responsible. But what I've discovered is that people actually show up in greater levels. They actually are showing up with even more responsibility. And here's the thing, Robert, is your A players, they're probably already still responsible. Now you might have some C and D players that weren't responsible when they're in the office and they're not responsible at home. Listen, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So if I'm a responsible person, and what I've seen is that, as some states are going back to work and a lot of employees are just letting their teams like work from remote if they want to, or ask them to come in just a couple of days a week, and people are actually more engaged. They're much more appreciative because I think, with the whole digital world, it's like we don't necessarily have to be on site for everything.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I've seen a couple of things where maybe a typical hour-long meeting can now be done in 20, 30 minutes. So meetings are a lot more efficient. A lot of my calls, I'm now asking the participants to rate the meeting. Mm-hmm. So you will very quickly, find out if you're terrible at running meetings. So if they're giving you a 4 out of 10 or something, then you need to change up the format, come up with the agenda, just be a lot more efficient.
Well, another way to kind of like think about your meetings, Robert, is that we teach people everybody's responsible for the meeting. Right? So if you go into a meeting and go, oh, we didn't accomplish anything, well, you're also responsible. I know you're not running the meeting, right? But you also have a responsibility. So we teach them, here are some questions to ask in your meeting, even though if you're not leading it, that generate, forward action.
Right.
So when I ask people like the same thing, it's like rate it. Some people say 4. I go, well, why'd you let it be a 4? You knew 15 minutes into this meeting it was going to be a 4. Mm-hmm. Why did you raise it, right? Why were you not responsible and raise the flag and go, hey, this is not productive?
Yeah, that's true. Call people out.
Yeah, and actually like have people like, like almost pull for the meeting. right? You almost get this sense when you rate your meetings, it's like, oh my gosh, this could be a level 10. I don't know. What would that look like if we had a level 10 meeting?
Yep.
And sometimes a great way to do it is like pre-frame it. It's like, hey, we're going to have a meeting. Let's make it a level 10. What needs to happen for you to make it a level 10?
Right.
Everybody to say what is a level 10, and just make sure you accomplish those things that people need to know about.
Do you ever
to meetings?
Do you ever, if you've got somebody who's always not, distant or either complaining about meeting, do you ever, give them the task of running the meeting, just to put them on the spot and see how difficult it is in trying to run a meeting and get the agenda and get people engaged?
That's a fantastic idea. Also, I think that the thing that you do have to be careful of, because if they are negative, they can sabotage it right away. So I think that's a good idea. But I also think like pre-framing it before you have the conversation and almost asking them like, hey, when you're always negative, how do you think you come across to everybody?
Right.
Because the challenge with negative people, right, is like they're probably negative in every area of their life, not just on your meeting. Right? They're probably negative at home, with their kids, with their husband, with their wife, with the mailman. Right? It's like if negative is in me, negative is going to come out of me. And so, helping people to, to see like how they show up, I think is maybe even as helpful as having them run the meeting.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Any last words of wisdoms for our audience here, Dennis? You've been great Robert, so far.
Here's the thing. When people don't know what to do you know what they do?
Tell me.
Right? They do nothing. And I think, some people are still a little bit shell-shocked and we're just kind of standing still. And so I think my best advice is like, go do something. Go activate yourself. Go make forward movement. And you'll always get some feedbacks. Like you take an action, you get a consequence. That consequence is just feedback, and just continue to like take action, get feedback, take action, get feedback, but keep moving forward. And when you don't know what to do, just ask yourself, it's like, hey, what could be possible? What's a possible action? And then just start taking some action. Because I think the thing that I've seen is, unfortunately, is that there are a lot of people that just aren't doing a lot. And then they complain about why their businesses aren't growing. Well, there's ways to grow your business. You got to do it different today. It's got to look different. But my encouragement is go take some action. Move forward.
On that point, Dennis, are you suggesting, they take on this big, huge task, like, let me think of an extreme, maybe going out and climbing Mount Everest, or maybe just, taking a half a mile walk down the street, or maybe, climbing the local hill nearby, just that, small baby steps towards maybe some type of bigger goal?
Yeah, I think action begets action, right? So if you're not used to taking action, just going to do something, right away. Just always in forward movement. Never stay standing still. Hey, in fact, Robert, let's give away a free gift. You want to do that?
Sure.
I got an idea. So
okay.
I've got like the top 20 coaching questions to coach yourself on how to take action. So what if we give that away? What do you think?
Okay, awesome. How do they do that?
So let's do this, okay? Is take out your cell phone right now as you're listening to your podcast and just simply text bonus to 313-438-8179. So you text bonus to 313-438-8179. And then they'll ask you for your email, and then we'll just email you that bonus on the coaching questions. And you can just use it to create action with yourself, use it to create action with your team, and just keep people moving forward. So let's just give that away as a free gift.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And then if they don't want to do that, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
If they don't want to do that, then don't even contact me. Don't even
okay.
Don't contact me, right? No. If you want to listen, if you have not enjoyed this podcast, then just email Robert at the Radix Group and give him all of your complaints. But if you love this podcast, email Dennis at leadershipdevgroup.com. That's my personal email. Dennis at leadershipdevgroup.com. And with any of your questions and whatever I can do to serve your audience, Robert, that's what I want to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate your time today. It's been great advice. I'm sure that our audience will have got a few nuggets from you, and hopefully they'll be contacting you by text to get that little bonus from you. So thank you again, Dennis. This is the Landscapers podcast, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you, Dennis. Cheers.
This was the Commercial Landscaper podcast, hosted by Dave Anderson, author of Leader is Not a Title, and Robert Clinkenbeard, author of The Ironman Mindset for Entrepreneurs. You can find more details about the show and the hosts at the radixgroupllc.com or thecommerciallandscaper.com.